Our theme for this summer is an altar in the world, and our premise is that God, the creator of heaven and earth, is speaking into ordinary lives like ours. That the God who spoke into the life of Moses, this ordinary shepherd, that same God speaks into our lives as well. Do we believe that to be true? In Celtic theology, there is a concept of the thin place that separates our conscious world with all of our to-do lists. Anybody have a to-do list? That separates our world from our smartphones and our schedules and our schemes and our dreams and our worries. That there is a thin place that separates our conscious world from that mystical world where that great mystery we call God is to be found. And it is awakened at the most amazing of moments. When we hold our child for the first time. When we see that rainbow over our neighborhood. When we see a whale spouting off the coast. When we walk with a loved one through the end of their life, there are those moments when we sense there's more going on in life than just us, and there's a presence that words cannot define, but we feel it and we know it on some level to be true and to be real. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book, which some of us are reading this summer, and which Julie and I are preaching on each week, says this about the importance of paying attention to these wow sacred moments. This is what she says. The practice of paying attention really does take time. Most of us move so quickly that our surroundings become no more than the blurred scenery we fly past on our way to somewhere else. You ever feel like your life is a blur? Yeah, I know I do. And then she says, we pay attention to the speedometer, the wristwatch, the cell phone, the list of things to do, all of which feed our illusion that life is manageable. Meanwhile, none of them meets the first criteria for reverence, which is to remind us that we are not gods with a little g. If anything, these devices sustain the illusion that we are in control, that we are calling the shots, that we might yet be little gods with a small g. If only we could find some way to do things more faster, more efficiently, we can be even more in control. And then she says this, reverence requires a certain pace. It requires a willingness to take detours, even side trips, which are not part of our original plan. To go on detours and side trips. And sometimes the detours are the good stuff. Quite a few years ago, Tricia and I were going on a trip in Costa Rica. Tricia and I, we were on sabbatical. Our kids were little. And we decided, before the days of GPSs, that we would rent a Jeep and for a couple of weeks just explore with my very rudimentary Spanish, which I mix in with my rudimentary French and confuses people in Costa Rica. And one day, I am sure we are going down the right road because I asked for directions from a market keeper, and I seemingly misunderstood because soon the road gave out and we are on a path surrounded just by cows. But that was the good stuff. On that trip, we met this little boy who was tending to the cows. And he befriended us, and we had wonderful conversation, and we met his family. Sometimes the detours are the good stuff. Moses is tending to the sheep because sheep are dumb. Sheep will walk off a cliff. Sheep will drink themselves to death if allowed to. Moses is going about his work, taking care of the sheep, and then he hears a voice. Verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush, and he looked, Moses did, And lo, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. The first thing that Moses does is he looks. He is detoured from his work. He looks. And then in verse 3, and Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. He turns aside. He goes down the detoured path. He leaves his responsibilities, his sheep, and then we hear this. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses says, here I am. Because Moses turned aside, because he was willing to be detoured, he was open to the presence of God speaking into his life. Being open to change is our call. Sometimes we're so busy. I've told a story before, but it's a great story for Father's Day. I remember I came home from work, and I was really tired. And all I wanted to do was veg out and read the sports page. And my daughter, our daughter, Lindsay, was about 3 years of age. And she said, Daddy, I want to show you something. And I said, sweetie, not right now. I'm just relaxing. Daddy, Daddy, I want to show you something. And I'm reading the paper. All I want to do is relax. Just give me 10 minutes, I'm thinking. And then Lindsay crawls up into my lap. With her 2 chubby little hands, she grabs the newspaper and she rolls it into a ball. And she throws it on the ground. And then she takes my face in her hands and she says, Daddy, can you see me? The spiritual journey is about being aware that our Creator of heaven and earth, for some inexplicable reason, desires to get our attention and speak our name. Do we believe that to be true? Do we believe that the God who spoke then also speaks our name? Jack, Lucy, Lisa, Brendan, Kent. Do we believe that burning bush events still happen? Julie offered a beautiful prayer, invited us into a time of remembrance for what happened this week in South Carolina. 9 people were murdered. 9 African-American neighbors of ours were murdered by a young white male who spent 1 hour in prayer and Bible study, being offered the gift of hospitality. And we could imagine that the people who grieve for their loved ones, and we who saw such senseless murder, can only shake our head and ask, where was God? Why didn't God show up? Why were these faithful people, sisters and brothers, why were they seemingly abandoned? Where is the God who spoke to Moses then? Why didn't God speak into that setting? Sometimes all we do is sense the absence of God, right? I mean, that's true at times in my life. The next day, this young man was captured. And he was in a cell with a video camera on him, and he was listening in to the bail hearing as far as what bail would be set. And the family members of those who had lost their loved ones spoke. And this is the headline from the Boston Globe of this week. Victims' families offer forgiveness to the accused killer. Can you imagine? And here is what one woman, Nadine Collier, daughter of 70-year-old Ethel Lance, who was murdered. This is what the daughter said as she looked through the camera at the young man who was standing in his cell. This is what she said to her mother's killer. You took something very precious away from me, but I forgive you and have mercy. May God have mercy on your soul. Sometimes we're in the midst of something that defies logic. Politicians were already calling for this young man to go to have the death penalty. Others were imagining that this young man needed to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. People were already preparing for revenge, but those who were most affected were offering the gift of forgiveness and asking God's mercy. Sometimes we're in the midst of something that defies our logic, our sense of what is possible, and we know that we have to take off our shoes because we are standing on holy ground. Of course, the call to Moses didn't end with Moses hearing his name. He was called to a task. He was called to speak a word of challenge to the Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And that is another story in and of itself. And these remarkable families who offered grace and forgiveness to the assailant who took away what was most precious to them are calling us in South Carolina and us here in Beverly and around our nation to have this dialogue, this debate about race and inclusion and forgiveness and mercy and justice. The work continues for us all. But that is for today, this afternoon, and tomorrow. But that courtroom in South Carolina was transformed. It became, for a moment, holy ground. And God was witnessing to us through these remarkable people of what life can be like when it is governed by love. But first, says Barbara Brown Taylor, we have to be open to the possibility, to the truth, that God, the creator of heaven and earth, is speaking our name. And all we have to do is be humble in heart and have the ears to hear and the eyes to see and the hearts to be touched. This is the good news. Thanks be to God. And this week, let's pay attention. Amen.